okay? Your nurse, she read too many stories. You understand? Too many stories. Yeah.
Mira,
I've seen it. I've seen it. Okay? This all here, none of this. No existo, okay? You understand me? This Eden does not exist. No, it's a fantasy. Okay, see that? Those are the names of the people who just made this. They made this whole thing up. Okay? It happened once and they just turned it into a big fucking lie. That's all this is. No.
Llévame, mira. Aquí quiero que me lleves. Mira.
No.
Aquí.
I know, I understand.
Aquí están mis amigos.
This is a long way. You understand? I am not taking you to North Dakota.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dan.
And I'm Mike.
So welcome to 15-Minute Film Fanatics, Season 8. Here we are, Mike. And Mike, this week we have another request.
This one's from Harry in Wyoming.
Harry in Wyoming wants us to do Logan by James Mangold, 2017. Mangold wrote the screenplay with Scott Frank and Michael Green. So here we go. Mike, in part one, we always talk about our overall take on the movie. So we had both seen Logan before in the past, never discussed it, watched it this week to do the podcast. So here we go. Part one, overall, what's your take on Logan?
I think it's a top 3 Marvel movie of all time. I call movies like this movies with ideas, right? It's not a popcorn movie in the same sense that like Jurassic World is. This is a universe away from just being some kind of cheap thrill. And there obviously a lot of work and attention went into making this movie, which I really appreciate. But it's not a film on the other end, right? It's based on well-beloved source material, but you do get one. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, you know that you just made a bunch of listeners say technically it's not a Marvel movie because it doesn't take place in the MCU because the X-Men are all in this other universe. But we'll keep going.
It would be much to their credit if it were, because it would elevate the whole universe MCU as a whole. You get one thing with this movie, which is obvious, which is Hugh Jackman is probably the best actor to play a superhero of all time. He's truly a classic triple threat. He can sing, act, and dance, although he only does one of the 3 in this movie. And you get the inimitable Patrick Stewart, who I love, who's absolutely fantastic in this movie. It's got a great ensemble cast, including the villains. And it's just enjoyable all the way through. My favorite thing to say about the second Wolverine movie is that the whole thing should take place on top of a bullet train. There's a famous fight scene on top of a bullet train. And I think it's the same team. But what they definitely got right in this movie is it's certainly impelled forward. You feel like you're being carried forward. It feels shorter than it is. And overall, it's very enjoyable.
Yeah, I watched it. I watched the noir version, the black and white version. Now, you watched it in color this time, right?
I did. And
it was so enjoyable to watch the noir version. And I love this movie so much, and I love it the more I think about it. And that's you actually texted me once and said that's a habit of mine, that a day later I start to really like ramp up and like the movies. I think I agree with you that Hugh Jackman is so good. And there were parts of the movie that sucked me into this as a movie about this guy that I forgot it was a superhero movie. So I was so involved with him and his anger and his muttering and trying to make believe he's not dying. And then all of a sudden there's that scene where the caravan's following them and there's a big car chase and you're like, oh yeah, that's right. Because it's funny, the first scene when he kills everybody outside the limo, I laughed because I'm like, okay, they got that out of the way. We're going to show you, here's what an R-rated Wolverine can do. Okay, that's all done. The wrong guys pick a fight with them. Let's start the movie. And I found myself getting sucked into the human elements of the movie just as much as the action stuff,
because it is actually very funny, right? There's a lot of, it's very contrapuntal in the movie, right? You start off with Wolverine, but he's a limo driver, or a glorified Uber driver in the year 2029 with his cheater glasses. He lives just over the border in Mexico, so he can keep Professor X safely away from people. It's very well set up and very imaginative, which I really enjoyed that, apart from the performances.
It's also the second film we've actually done this season where a bald guy disintegrates in sunlight, because we did Nosferatu.
That's true.
We did Nosferatu as well.
I hadn't thought of that.
That's how good we are. So we talked about Hugh Jackman. I love his performance in that. Everything about this movie is him being old. Like he's supposed to be like, I think 170 years old in the universe, right? And he acts that way. Like he begins in a cemetery. He wants to die, but he can't kill himself. He's miserable, right? He's like this hero gone to seed. And that's why Caliban says to him, something is happening to you, Logan. Like, you're sick. I can smell it. And everything about his despair is so good. Like, and that's why he even dies in the opening scene, quote unquote, dies, and then comes back. But his simmering anger, and I'll talk a little later about this, about why it's in there. I think it's so convincing, and Hugh Jackman is so good to bring that off. And let's talk about this. The whole movie is modeled on Shane, right? And that's, they're watching Shane. We did Shane already this season, right? So what's your take on that?
Well, here's the thing that I think it takes from Shane the most, which I think is beautiful, which is that Shane implies a history with no flashbacks. I don't know if you're as annoyed by flashbacks as I am, right? But the beautiful thing about it is that it implies it the same way that The Searchers implies a history without flashbacks. And so what you get is real sublimated emotion instead of something cheap, right? So that you can have another scene or you can just lengthen the movie. Clearly, whatever happened in Westchester, which is what's broken Wolverine's heart, that his friends are dead, is never depicted.
Well,
right?
It's not depicted, but we know what it is. Is that Professor X had this?
We know exactly what happened, but we know long before that he was already embittered. Right? When he looks at the closest to the flashback you get is that when he looks at the comic book, right? He said it didn't happen like that. So something like it happened, and it's enough that it touches a nerve for him to even try to remember who he is. And so he's both clinging to who he is, but he can't bear it, right? What would that feel like? What would that be like? That would be like you had something inside your body that was a part of you, but it was poisoning you. And so I think that that's really beautifully done and well dramatized.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to go on record as saying, because I'll admit it, when things happen, history without flashbacks, that's good, man. That is a sweet phrase. That should be the name of your memoir someday. History without flashbacks. Well, it's also funny that he's like Shane in that, like, we'll get into this later, I assume, but he doesn't want to be the Wolverine anymore. He doesn't want to be Wolverine. He says it's all garbage. It's not who I am anymore. And I like what you just said, that he's so hurt by what happened with Professor X, that he's got to keep him, over across the border in that big metal thing and give him the drugs. That there's this, he's been put into this. It's kind of funny because Hugh Jackman is like so ripped and so tough, but the movie puts him in this strange domestic space. Like, think of all the domestic things that come up. Like with Professor X, it's like he's taking care of an elderly parent, right? Who just complains. He's like Livia Soprano, right? He makes him take the drugs, like, it's for your own good. And he's like, no, you're waiting for me to die. And he says, like, you're a disappointment to me. He says all the things you don't want your old father to say to you, right? He's got to take care of Laura, the wild kid, and like teach her table manners, right? There's a great bit in the store where she goes nuts and he's like, not okay, not okay. Caliban is like his nagging, Alice Cramden, like, I'm doing your washing and ironing, and like, I can't help you if you won't talk to me. And it's almost like when he takes Laura in the woods, it's like, take your child to work day. So it's kind of like he's got all these domestic vexations pulling at him, and that's not who he was, and he's trying to keep up with that, but he that's why he keeps drinking.
My favorite thing is when Caliban gives him the bottle of ibuprofen to pretend it's the seizure medication, because it's so unbelievably petty.
Yeah,
that's a beautiful counterpoint. That's a beautiful irony in itself.
Yeah, you don't see it, you don't see in the MCU, you don't see Captain America and Tony Stark getting into petty little arguments about like whose turn it is to take care of the Hulk or something. But this one is like, you just get such a good sense of his simmering anger, just like a Tuesday during the work week or something.
And I think if I had to imagine what reminded the writers of Shane, or how it's the most like Shane, it's in the costume. Because the beautiful thing about Shane is he takes his costume off, right? And he puts that blue shirt on. But when you look at the Wolverine lumbering around in the clothes that he wears in 2029, it's a shock to see the old blue and yellow costume from the comic books, right? They make it look as comical as possible to you by trying to make outward reality look super gritty. And I think if there's one little rhyming moment that could have gotten a writer started, how is this like Shane, or reminded them like Shane, I think it's in the costumes.
Yeah, and that's why we're jumping way ahead, but that's why I love it when the kids shave his beard. because they just want to give him like the Wolverine haircut. And that's part of it, is right. It's like he doesn't want to do that anymore, just in the way Alan Ladd doesn't want to be a gunfighter. He wants to take out the tree stump, and help run the farm and things like that. But circumstances force him into becoming this thing he tried to avoid. And that's what kind of happens in this movie as well. He doesn't want the haircut. He doesn't want the claws anymore, but circumstances force him to use them. Hi, welcome back. In part two, we always talk about our favorite moments or moments we found indicative of the film as a whole. But before we do that, Mike, I just want to go back to what you said about, before in part one, you mentioned, history without flashbacks. I thought that was great. And it occurred to me that in a lot of the superhero movies, especially in the MCU, you do get a lot of flashbacks. Because, you hear people say like, that's why in Spider-Man 2, you don't see Thor because he's been in a time warp. And those are the kind of things that like, they think they're building out the world. And we would have loved those things when we were 10, but
Absolutely.
they think they're like building out the world with all those flashbacks, but they're so much better when you don't see them.
Yeah, I think it's because none of those characters have real emotions. So all you have is information. So they'll give you as much as possible.
Yeah. And Hugh Jackman carries off. You need a certain kind of actor to convey a history without seeing that history, like him and like John Wayne and the Surgers. Okay. So what was one of your favorite moments in the movie?
So my favorite moment was, it looks like we're about to have a huge chase scene with the limousine as they're trying to drive away from the compound. And so they do something that every hero does in a movie, which is you got to drive the car through the fence. But in this case, it's a locked gate that bends and bends and bends and then ultimately doesn't snap. And so while the motorcycles are surrounding the limousine, he's got to put it in reverse, which of course exposes their broadside, which is totally riddled with bullets. And that's a lot. That's the feeling of the film. This happens over and over again. It's the film's main point, is that the things that you expect to happen in movies don't happen in life, right? And so the heroes make friends with the family, spoiler alert, everybody in the family dies, right? They go to stay at the hotel to have a nice shocking family, right? And it's a terrible moment, but it's just the gate all over again. And as soon as you even see the limo driving at the gate, you're like, oh no, that's no. Yeah. Right. And it's the same thing with the family. It's the same thing with the final scene. It's the same thing when you see the shocking young Hugh Jackman, which, by the way, let me say that I really hate that technology, but this is the only time that I really don't hate it. Any other movie we've actually ever watched or discussed that has this technology in it, really grinds my gears. And there's nothing worse than Arnold Schwarzenegger in Terminator Salvation, which, God forbid we ever do on this podcast. I don't even want to do a one shot about it, but that's just a pet peeve of mine, which works really well, right? But you're like, it is right, it is, but it isn't. And so it's about the nature of filmic truth, but it's leaning on what about films. And so it's an inherently kind of tongue-in-cheek universe or inherently ironic universe, because they don't dramatize things that way in their universe, but they expect you to know and have certain expectations.
That's great, Mike, because of course, like that's like lesson 76 for movies. Any gate, you can get through any gate with a car. It doesn't matter. And the gate will snap open. So when that gate doesn't open, it's just like you could just imagine, a Wolf Logan say like, it's another damn thing. And every single time, like, and getting angry and angry. And also what you just said reminded me of a movie we've done in the past that we both really liked, which is Zodiac. That's another movie that constantly upsets every movie assumption about a killer you think you're going to get, and all the unease that occurs because of that. So my moment has to ties in really nicely what you just said about like, how much is life like the movies and how much is life like art or not like art. My moment is when Laura keeps saying the kids' names like Joda, Gideon, Rebecca, Delilah, Richter, and she wants him to take her to North Dakota. We're going to go to Eden, right? And he says, no. And she pulls out the X-Men comic book to show him the coordinates. And he says, yeah, I've seen it. Okay, I've seen it. None of this. He says, no existo. Okay, this Eden does not exist. No Eden. And she says, see Eden. He says, no, it's a fantasy, kid. It's a fantasy. These are the names. And he shows her the writers. These are the names of the people that made this up. They made this whole thing up. They just turned it into a big lie, right? And they keep arguing. So it's kind of funny because the X-Men comic book is like a superhero movie, right? It's a superhero movie that they're all raised on. There's this place called Eden, and you're Wolverine, and you could take us there. And I think the movie, and going back to Shane again, ask us this question, which is like, what's it like to be admired and to even be a legend, but to feel unworthy of that, and know that that's not really how it happened, that what everybody thinks, that's not what it's like, right? And he hates himself for that because he feels like he's living this lie. I can't help you. That's not what happened. No existo. And she's like, no, these legends really are true. And he's like, no, they're all fake. They're all fake. It's like Laura wants to live in a superhero movie, and he's trying to live in this rated R Logan Noir thing. And I love that moment because it makes like the world of art overlap with our world. It's like, it's like she holds up the X-Men comic book like one of the sacred texts, and he's like, no, that's not what it's like. That's not what the world is like. And he's living it. He's like, I'm proof that's not what the world is like.
But of course, the central tension is that's who she needs, right? And so even if you think you're unworthy of it, right, the father-daughter relationship, you don't get to opt out of that, right? Because that might not be how you perceive yourself at 170 years old, but it's certainly how someone perceives you at 12 years old, right? So it is experientially more truth. It is the truth.
Yeah, because what does Shane say? A man must be what he is. He can't break the mold, and he doesn't want to do that. That's why I love it when the bad guy gets in the limo with, as I live and breathe, the Wolverine. And he's like, he can't even say, you must have me confused with someone else with half adamantine claws coming out of it. Like everyone, and like when Laura's mother, or turns out not his mother, but the nurse at the hospital recognizes him. No, I'm not the Wolverine. No, you're the Wolverine. That's not. But that's who he is, and that's who they need.
And that's who he isn't, or claims not to be, until, for example, he gives himself the serum, right? Because to steal a bonus moment. Right, he's Logan, and then in the heat of battle, when he gives himself the adrenaline or whatever it is, the Wolverine comes out.
Absolutely.
Okay, welcome back. So in part 3, of course, we always talk about the title or the ending or the key takeaways. Dan, what do you think about the ending?
I have a lot to say about the ending and the title. Now, the title seems self-evident, but I think the title's interesting because, he already made The Wolverine. I guess they could have done like Batman, like The Batman and Batman, and they could have just made one called Wolverine. But I think it's interesting because the movie's about how he doesn't want to be Wolverine. He wants to be Logan. And this goes back to my moment. Like, we watch Superman and we want to be Superman. Like, no one watches Superman and says, I'd like to be Clark Kent. We don't watch Batman and say it'd be cool to be Bruce Wayne. Maybe it'd be cool to have Wayne Manor, but it'd be much cooler to be Batman. But here it's kind of flipped. Here the hero is saying, "Listen, being Batman ain't all it's cracked up to be. Being Wolverine, I'm telling you, it's not worth it. Like, it's not all it's cracked up to be. I wish I could just drive the limo around and have nobody bother me." So I think at the end, when it ends with him dying and the eulogy from Shane, right? There's no more guns in the valley. So Laura, the kid, is created as a weapon, but now she can be a person. There's hope for her to be a person, right? And that's what I think the movie's about, becoming a human being. That's why when he's dying, he says, so this is what it feels like, because he's never felt that before, right? And he wants her to be the opposite of what they made her to be. He says, don't be what they made you. And I think both Shane and Logan are movies about somebody who's larger than life and a legendary person who tries to turn his back on that legend and say it's not all it's cracked up to be. It brings a lot of pain. It's history without flashbacks, but then he has to use it because as Logan says, bad shit happens to people I care about. And he wants to not care. And he wants his heart to be more bulletproof than it is, but it's not. And that, I think that's what I think is interesting about the movie. It's about a guy that he is Wolverine, but he wants to be Logan. And then he's got to be Wolverine at the end again.
So I do like this movie a lot. I just want to complicate one notion about the ending, which is, I think, why I liked it more on my second viewing than my first. But here's kind of what was going on in my mind, which is we know that Logan sets up this ironic universe throughout the first, let's call it 95 minutes of the film, but it gives you poignancy through the last 5 minutes. Logan builds a universe where guns are suddenly pulled on people get sneak attacked, you get surrounded while you're not looking, right? Caliban surprises the guards and has the grenades, right? There's no glorious death for the grenade, he just blows everybody up, right? Professor X dies suddenly, right? He doesn't get to say goodbye to Logan. It's all built into the rest of the structure of the film, because when he's stabbed in bed, sometimes the bad guy creeps up onto you, right, and stabs you in bed. Wolverine has plot armor to the extent that his death is Christ-like to an almost annoying degree. right? Just in the sense that right, they want to draw out that Wolverine is sacrificing himself for his kid. Sometimes sacrifice looks like Caliban's sacrifice, right, which is a sudden grenade explosion. But that's right, fear the light. But that's not what's going to happen to Wolverine, right? Wolverine dies slower than Vader, and manages to settle 170 years worth of psychological pressure that's on his brain gets resolved in the last 2 minutes. And so kind of Shane builds a universe where it's like good will triumph, good will triumph, good will triumph, good will triumph, and it's kind of a draw at the end. Logan builds a universe where it's like evil has triumphed, keep your head down, evil has triumphed, and all of a sudden everybody's a hero at the end. Now, is that the exit that Hugh Jackman deserved from the franchise? It is.
Yes.
He deserved it. I understand why it was done. But if you look at the rest of the film as a whole, it's a suspiciously square peg. And it just stood out for me that the final death scenes, the final fight scenes are incredible.
Yeah. Well, so you're accusing the very ending of sentimentality that's out of place in that universe?
Yes.
All right. Well,
I'm saying they built a structure that you wouldn't expect, right? If you see a Christmas tree, you expect a star at the top, right? And it's right. This is just something totally weird. It's totally unexpected. It's like it's a sudden zoigma that just kind of pops out of nowhere. But they have to do it because he's Hugh Jackman.
Well, the other extreme of that, my friend, would be if they can't kill off Hugh Jackman the way that Josh Brolin gets killed off in No Country for Old Men. Remember how he gets killed off?
Sure. No,
like off screen, he smiles, and that's it. You're like, wait a minute, he's dead. Like, so that is I think what you're talking. That's the universe that Logan happens in, right? I mean, like he can't die that way.
I understand but there's got to be a spectrum between that and Boromir. And this is like a 9 out of 10 Boromirs, where he's been look how many times he gets stabbed. Just, I don't know if you own the movie, just rewatch it. I get that he's the Wolverine in the moment, but I'm giving that 9 out of 10 Boromirs. And I'm just saying
adrenaline. He took all the adrenaline because he knew it was going to kill him, but he had to put on the fringe jacket and go face Jack Palance.
I get it, and I'm with it. I just, there's a certain drawn out drama to it that the writers are too smart. I know that they know that it doesn't fit in the movie, and they're like, I guess we're doing it. Forget it.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I thought it fit. I was totally with it. I was totally with it. So, well, thanks for listening to our conversation about Logan, and thanks for the recommendation. We hope you've enjoyed this conversation. It was fun to watch the movie again. You could follow us on Twitter at 15MINFilm, and you can also follow us where, Mike?
Letterboxd.
Follow us on Letterboxd. Let us know what we should watch next. We're still rolling, and we're still taking requests. Thanks so much for listening, everybody.
We'll see you next time.